Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Waterside Press. Putting justice into words is their slogan, they certainly do that. This is an important book. It's now basically a book which is looked at in terms of legal history to a certain extent, what lessons we might possibly learn from it, but the title is emotive enough as it stands. It's 3 cases that shook the law. Been written by Ronald Bartle, who will be known to many of you as a Stipe in the past. Elizabeth and I have looked at the book and discussed it. It's a short book, paperback. We've given it the title for our appreciation: 3 notorious cases, 3 death sentences which still invite controversy. We'll get on to the people in a moment. Let's just have a quick look at the book. Picture of the Royal Courts of Justice on the front, and then there's the spine. And then there's a picture of the author on the back with a little bit of blurb about who they are actually covering in this book. Now, the back of the book, there's a little bit of advertising. I'm always going to give Waterside plenty of advertising. We've also got some more advertising there. And then there's an index. It's only a short index. And you can see there, it's not a long book, it's only just over 200 odd pages, 230 pages long. You do have an interesting structure of chapters which we'll get onto in a moment. There's the front of it, and then there's the actual book itself. You can see how it's structured there, and you've got it's available as a paperback and EPUB ebook, and as an Adobe ebook as well. There's the actual contents section, which you can see there. Looking at the first person was Edith Thompson, second William Joyce, and the third Timothy Evans. So it's in the 3 parts to cover the 3 stories. Then about the author, mentions a little bit about Mr. Bartlett. Then there's an important dedication, which I always like to mention. Important dedication there. And then there's an introduction looking at the cases of Edith Thompson in 1922, Joyce in 1945, and Evans in 1950. And then after that, you get into the actual books themselves. That's the murder. First, it starts with the murder of Percy Thompson and runs all the way through. I shall make some comments in a few minutes about the book, but let's go through the review that we've written, the appreciation. If the book illustrates or demonstrates anything, it must be that it's entirely possible that the course of justice can be perverted or subverted by the very people who are charged with upholding it, even though their intentions may well be quite the opposite. And this book's new from Waterside Press, and they are actually champions to a certain extent of some of these bad decisions. For whatever reasons, we call them bad decisions, and Waterside are putting justice into words by trying to explain what has happened. The book here discusses in detail 3 cases that did shake the law. The authors used a great deal of original source material to shed further light, it's hoped, on 3 particular cases. That's Edith Thompson, William Joyce, Lord Haw he was known as, and Timothy Evans, each of whom were condemned to death and executed on often flimsy or unsound evidence. Not only did these cases shake the legal establishment, they by turns appalled and titillated the general public, and that is one of the biggest single problems with capital crimes, and another good reason why proper behaviour has now come in and we don't execute people. Let's deal with the first case. That's Edith Thompson, who, largely because of the impassioned letters she wrote to her lover and lodger, Eric Bywaters, who actually did the murder, she was hanged for being complicit in the murder of her husband, Percy Thompson. These 3 had been living together in a sort of ménage à 3 arrangement in Kensington Gardens, and Edith's letters to her darling Eric, reproduced in often embarrassing and tedious detail, page after page in this book, were considered evidence enough to guarantee her appointment with the hangman. And before I go any further, I'm going to make a very serious criticism and allegation, and that is that the papers are all closed files, the ones relating to Thompson, how she died and the aftermath, don't think it's acceptable for the Home Office to continue to keep these documents sealed and not available for the public. They're treating the public as idiots and with contempt. We pay the bills, and the Sir Humphreys and the civil servants and all the other people involved should recognise that we have a right to know what was going on, and it's simply unacceptable to continue to hide the truth in these and many other cases where we should have the right to know. It's not about the 30-year rule or anything else. It's clear that there's a cover-up of some sort, and that should be exposed for what it is, because it's obvious that certain people did not behave the way they should have done. Enough of that, and that will be a matter for another case, but at least Bartle has mentioned that in the book, not in quite as vehement terms as I have, but I think it's an important point for everybody to bear in mind. The author, let me go on to him, Bartle, was the former DJ, district judge in inner London. That's a stipe in the past, of course, a stipendiary magistrate before. And he contends, and in the case of Edith, that the sentence was unjust, as were the other sentences imposed in the other two cases, namely those of Evans and Lord Haw-Haw. Can I again say that it is always the case with both the courts and the Home Office that they can never say sorry. It's incredible how they always have to try to cover themselves all the time. And yet, just a couple of words would perhaps just make that difference, because we all make mistakes. Readers and researchers, of course, will be interested in the history of World War II in particular, and this is actually the William Joyce case and its aftermath, because of what had happened, and the fact, of course, that Joyce was an American. Joyce's biographical details, of course, were not widely known, therefore all the more astounding. I mean, obviously he was a horrible man. If you've ever heard the recordings, I have, you can understand why people felt the way they did. Prior to his notorious broadcasting career as Lord Haw-Haw, from Germany, being nasty about the British, he dedicated his life to undermining British morale during the war. He was a notorious scoundrel and a malcontent, and so virulently anti-Semitic that even the British fascist leader, Oswald Mosley, couldn't stand him and ultimately gave him the sack. But the question remains, apart from if you have, as I do, an abhorrence to capital punishment in any form, did Joyce deserve to be hanged as a traitor? That's the question, because of treason and the way we were at that particular time, history and the views of the time. British public opinion at the time would have said yes, and did, of course, he was hanged. The book, however, contends that as it was discovered to be an American rather than a Brit, this mere technicality, you might say, should have spared him. However, he was hanged, and at that time the concept of treason, which we could look at again in 2016 with the role of ISIS and all the other problems we're facing at the moment, could be reviewed afresh. We could talk about the Easter Rising in 1916 being treachery. You could talk about a whole range of things as 100 years have gone by. But again, you have to get a balance into this. And at the end of the day, is actually a hanging a deterrent? And the answer is no, they're still going to do it because they still are. Think about it if you support capital punishment, because it doesn't solve anything. The third case is one of the worst I've seen for a very long time, and that's Timothy Evans, and it's still not actually recognising some of the problems, which in 2016 is quite unacceptable. Little more can be said other than that the death sentence meted out to him was apparently the direct result of false testimony from the chief prosecution witness called Reginald or John Christie, who, as it was later discovered, was a serial killer, more than likely the guilty party. Now, again, we've got a balance of probabilities, not a beyond reasonable doubt issue here. And the question must be, are there going to be two serial killers living together who are totally unknown to each other in the same house? Pretty unlikely. And Evans, bearing in mind how unintelligent he was, and the sort of man Christie was, as a gassed First World War person, and the lying and all the other things, it's fairly obvious there were some very substantial problems. However, the word apology still hasn't really been surfacing, and I think it should do. Finally, having got that off my chest, let me conclude by saying the relentless processes by which these miscarriages of justice came about are revealed in this book a cautionary tale which explores each case in fascinating detail via letters as well as transcripts and original court records. There's a bibliography in the acknowledgements section of the book which I think is worth reading. Criminal lawyers especially, as well as magistrates and judges, will find it an illuminating read, and I hope anybody who's still convinced that capital punishment has any place or role to play might think again, having read these books, this book in particular, and other books by Waterside. The publication date is 2016. I'm very grateful to Ronald Bartle for bringing these cases together. There's the front page again, there's the spine, and then there's the back, just a little bit of detail. Just opening it up in the middle, this is the first case again, Thompson's case, closing speeches of counsel. This is actually towards the middle of the book. The book runs to about 240 pages. You've got a great deal of information which Bartle has researched very, very proficiently, and I do think it's very important. And the point I make about the closed papers and official documents remaining closed is included on page 114. Then you've got William Joyce, and then you've got finally Timothy Evans at the end. I found this an important book because I remain appalled at the way in which officials continue to cover up themselves, the things that have happened in the past, when we really ought to draw a line under these matters, have it out in the open so we know where we are. The trouble is, of course, there are conspiracy theories and everything else. I would point out, having just reviewed a book on professional insurance, indemnity insurance, that I am highly regulated as a barrister. I have to have an insurance policy. It's mandatory because I can be sued if I make a mistake. These people made a big mistake because it was taking someone's life. They can't be sued and we can't bring the people back. Think about it. This book is an important book, and I do think it's one that everybody should read if you have an interest in the way criminal justice might be handed out in the future. Thank you to all concerned, especially to Brian Gibson at Waterside for having the courage to publish this. Thank you. Bye-bye.